Hello, Aquarius. Welcome back, my beautiful souls. I hope you're doing well today. Before we begin, if you enjoy these readings and they resonate with you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from or what your intuition has been telling you lately. I always love reading your stories because every journey carries its own kind of wisdom. All right, let's take a deep breath together and see what the cards want to reveal. Oh my God, the very first card that comes forward is Judgment, and I can't help but pause for a second because this doesn't feel like ordinary energy. It feels like someone has reached a moment where pretending is simply becoming harder than telling the truth. There is something about this person that feels different now. Their silence no longer feels comfortable to them. Their excuses don't seem to fit the way they once did. It almost feels as though their own heart has become louder than every reason they kept using to avoid what they truly feel. As I sit with this energy, it seems like this person may have spoken words they never imagined they would say. Maybe they admitted something to someone who has been influencing this connection. It could have been a friend, a family member, someone close to them, or simply someone whose opinion carried far too much weight. Whatever the situation looks like, the energy suggests that something private has finally been spoken out loud. And that's important. Because once feelings leave the heart and become words, everything begins to change. It doesn't necessarily mean every obstacle disappears overnight. It doesn't mean every answer suddenly becomes clear. But it feels like a door that had been locked for a very long time has finally been opened, even if only by a few inches. Then Ace of Cups quietly appears, and yeah, this changes the atmosphere completely. This doesn't feel like somebody chasing excitement anymore. It feels much softer than that, much deeper, almost as if this person has become tired of fighting against their own emotions. I keep getting the feeling that they may have spent a long time convincing themselves they were fine, that they could move on, that keeping everything inside was somehow easier than risking disappointment. But emotions have a way of growing in silence. Sometimes they become so full that they eventually overflow, no matter how carefully someone tries to contain them. Aquarius, I don't know exactly how this connection has unfolded for you, but it feels like your presence has continued living inside this person's heart in ways they never expected. Even during the moments when they appeared distant, even when communication slowed, even when life seemed to carry both of you in different directions, something about your energy never completely disappeared from their world. Okay, now justice comes into view. I notice something shifting here. It almost feels like someone is beginning to question the stories they've been telling themselves. Maybe they believed other people's opinions for a while. Maybe they listened to fears that weren't truly their own. Maybe they kept choosing what seemed logical instead of what genuinely brought peace to their heart. But justice has this quiet way of asking difficult questions. Questions that are almost impossible to ignore forever. I keep hearing something like, what if I've been running away from the very thing that was meant to teach me the most? Not because anyone forced that realization upon them. Not because somebody demanded answers, it simply feels like life has slowly been placing them in situations where honesty became unavoidable. I also wouldn't be surprised if this person has recently found themselves replaying old conversations between the two of you. Certain memories seem louder now. Words that once felt ordinary suddenly carry completely different meaning. Moments they barely noticed before now seem impossible to forget. Almost like their heart has been quietly rearranging every memory until the picture finally starts making sense. And then we have Page of Cups. This card makes me smile because the energy feels nervous, not dramatic, not overwhelming, just vulnerable. It feels like someone standing at the edge of a conversation they've wanted to have for a very long time, wondering whether they'll find the courage to speak. I don't necessarily feel someone who suddenly becomes fearless. Actually, it almost feels like the opposite. They still carry uncertainty. They still wonder whether it's too late. They may still question how you would respond if they opened their heart. But despite all those questions, the desire to remain silent doesn't seem as strong as it used to be. That's what feels different. The silence itself is beginning to feel heavy. The energy suggests this person may have reached a point where hiding their feelings requires more effort than simply being honest. And sometimes, that is where everything begins. Not because every problem has already been solved, not because every road ahead is perfectly clear, but because one honest moment has the power to change the direction of an entire story. Aquarius, as I continue looking at these four cards together, Judgment, Ace of Cups, Justice, and Page of Cups, it feels like we're standing at the very beginning of something important. Almost like the universe has quietly gathered every unspoken emotion into one place and is gently asking this person whether they're finally ready to stop carrying everything alone. Whether that conversation has already happened or is still finding its way into the physical world, I can't help but notice that something has shifted beneath the surface. The energy feels different now, softer, more open, more willing to tell the truth than it has been in a very long time. And somehow, it feels like this is only the beginning of what these cards are preparing to reveal. It almost feels like this person has been standing in front of a version of themselves they barely recognize anymore. Death arrives here with such quiet intensity that I don't immediately think about endings. I keep thinking about everything they've been carrying that no longer feels like it belongs to them. Old fears, old expectations, old ways of protecting themselves that may have once felt necessary, but now seem incredibly exhausting. The energy suggests they're beginning to notice patterns they couldn't fully see before. It's almost like life has been placing the same lesson in front of them again and again, until they finally stopped asking, "Why is this happening?" and started wondering, "What is this trying to teach me?" That feels like a very different question. Because when someone becomes curious instead of defensive, something inside them naturally begins to soften. I also can't help but notice that this transformation doesn't seem loud from the outside. People around them may not even realize how much is changing internally. They might still appear calm, they may still follow the same routines, they could even smile the same way they always have. Yet beneath that familiar surface, it feels like entire beliefs are quietly being rearranged. Some nights may have felt longer than usual. Some conversations may have lingered in their mind long after they ended. There seems to be a growing awareness that constantly trying to control every outcome has never truly brought them peace. Yeah, it's almost as if they're realizing that certainty isn't the same thing as happiness. That realization seems small at first, but it carries incredible weight. Because once someone begins letting go of the need to control every possibility, they create room for something much more honest to enter their life. As the hermit gently appears, everything slows down. I don't feel isolation here. I feel reflection. This person seems less interested in proving themselves to the world and more interested in understanding themselves. There could be moments where they choose silence, not because they're avoiding people, but because they're finally listening to thoughts they've ignored for far too long. I keep picturing someone sitting alone after a busy day. No distractions, no conversations, just thinking. Thinking about choices, thinking about timing, thinking about why certain people continue to occupy space in their heart, no matter how much time passes. Aquarius, I can't help but feel your energy keeps appearing during these quiet moments. Not necessarily because they're forcing themselves to think about you, it feels more natural than that. Almost like something reminds them of you without warning. A familiar song, a place they once visited, a random phrase someone says. Little moments that gently pull your memory back into focus. It seems like those moments are becoming harder to dismiss. Okay. The card that truly catches my attention here is the Star. Seeing this card in an Aquarius reading always carries something beautifully personal. The energy suggests you may have represented something this person didn't fully understand when they first met you. Perhaps your honesty challenged them, perhaps your independence confused them, perhaps the way you remained authentic even during difficult moments quietly inspired them more than they ever admitted. There is something about your presence that doesn't feel forceful. It feels illuminating, like someone walking into a dark room and simply opening the curtains without saying a word. You didn't necessarily ask them to change. You didn't have to convince them to become someone different. It almost feels like your existence alone invited them to question whether they had been settling for a version of themselves that no longer reflected who they truly wanted to be. That's a powerful realization, not because anyone is perfect, but because genuine connections sometimes become mirrors. They show us possibilities we couldn't imagine on our own. I also feel this person is becoming less concerned with outside opinions. The voices that once seemed so important are beginning to fade into the background. Family expectations, friends' advice, social pressure, old beliefs about what love should look like. None of those things seem as convincing as they once did. Instead, they're paying closer attention to something much quieter, their own intuition. That feels significant, because intuition rarely shouts, it whispers, and people often hear it most clearly after life has humbled them just enough to stop chasing everyone else's answers. The final card resting here is the Moon. Oh my God, this doesn't feel confusing in the way people sometimes imagine. It feels deeply emotional, like someone exploring rooms inside themselves they've kept locked for years. There may still be moments where uncertainty appears, moments where they question whether they're interpreting everything correctly, moments where old fears briefly return and ask to be heard one last time. But I don't get the sense that those fears are controlling the story anymore. It feels more like they're being acknowledged before they're finally released. The energy suggests this person is learning that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's honesty. They're beginning to understand that protecting themselves by hiding every emotion may have also prevented them from experiencing the connection they truly desired. Aquarius, whether you realized it or not, it seems your presence became part of that awakening, not because you rescued them, not because you completed them, but because your authenticity quietly encouraged them to meet parts of themselves they had spent years avoiding. Something about this journey feels remarkably personal for them. The pace may not always be fast, the answers may not arrive all at once. Yet the cards resting here create the feeling that every small realization is leading them toward a version of themselves that feels lighter, more open, and much more willing to trust what their own heart has been trying to say all along. There is something beautifully quiet about the energy unfolding here. It doesn't feel rushed. It feels like someone slowly wiping fog from a window until they can finally see what has been standing in front of them all along. As the star appears once again, I can't help but notice how differently this person seems to be looking at you. It feels less like they're searching for answers outside themselves, and more like they're recognizing something they have always sensed but never fully trusted. Aquarius, it seems your authenticity has become impossible for them to overlook. There is something about the way you carry yourself that doesn't ask for approval. You don't seem to shape your identity around what everyone else expects. And oddly enough, that may have been one of the things they misunderstood in the beginning. Perhaps they thought your independence meant distance. Maybe your calmness looked like indifference. Maybe your silence was mistaken for a lack of emotion. But time has a fascinating way of correcting misunderstandings. The energy suggests that distance has given this person a perspective they couldn't have found while they were caught up in everyone else's opinions. Sometimes people only recognize someone's true value after the noise around them begins to fade. It feels like that's exactly what has been happening here. I keep sensing that conversations they once believed without question don't seem as convincing anymore. Stories they accepted as truth have begun to unravel on their own. It's almost like they're comparing what people said about you with what they actually experienced whenever they were with you. Those two things don't seem to match. And when that realization settles into someone's heart, it can change everything. Six of Cups gently comes forward, bringing an energy that feels incredibly familiar. This isn't simply about remembering the past. It feels more like remembering how they felt around you. Certain emotions seem impossible for them to recreate anywhere else. Maybe they've met new people. Maybe life has introduced different experiences. Maybe they genuinely tried to move forward without looking back. Yet something always seems to circle back to the connection you shared. I keep seeing someone smiling unexpectedly because of an old memory. A laugh they didn't realize they still remembered. A conversation that suddenly makes much more sense today than it did back then. Even ordinary moments seem to carry unexpected meaning. The energy suggests they aren't holding on to the past because they want to live there. They're revisiting it because they're finally seeing it clearly. Yeah, sometimes clarity doesn't arrive while we're living through something. Sometimes it quietly waits until enough time has passed for the heart to become honest. That's exactly what this feels like. Aquarius, I also feel this person is beginning to understand that you never ask them to become someone else. You simply encourage them to become more themselves. Looking back, they may realize that your words often came from a place of sincerity, even when those conversations felt uncomfortable. There is a quiet respect growing here, not because you were always right, not because either of you handled every situation perfectly, but because they can finally see the consistency in your character. As Queen of Swords rests beside these cards, the atmosphere shifts again. I really like this energy because it feels mature. This person seems to recognize that you've always valued honesty, even when honesty wasn't easy to hear. They may have once interpreted your directness as being emotionally distant. They may have wondered why you didn't chase them, why you didn't force conversations, or why you sometimes chose silence instead of conflict. Looking at these cards, it feels like they understand something very different today. Your silence wasn't punishment, it was self-respect. Your boundaries weren't walls. They were expressions of self-worth. That realization carries a quiet kind of admiration. It seems like they're beginning to appreciate qualities they once struggled to understand. Oh my God! I also keep getting the feeling that this person has started paying attention to details they overlooked before. The way you remained kind without trying to impress anyone, the way you stayed true to your values even when circumstances became complicated, the way you never seemed interested in pretending to be someone you weren't, just to make other people comfortable. There is something incredibly refreshing about authenticity. Not everyone recognizes it immediately, but once they do, it's very difficult to forget. The final card here is the High Priestess, and the entire reading becomes softer again. This feels like quiet knowing. The energy suggests this person may have stopped looking for proof because something inside them simply feels different. There may still be questions they can't fully answer. There may still be circumstances that need time to unfold naturally, but they don't seem as dependent on outside validation anymore. Instead, they're listening to that subtle inner voice they've ignored for so long. It almost feels as though every time they try to convince themselves this connection isn't important, something inside gently whispers otherwise. Not loudly, not dramatically, just consistently. Aquarius, I also wonder if you've sensed this shift yourself without fully understanding why. Sometimes we notice changes long before we can explain them. A feeling, a dream, an unexpected memory, a moment where someone's energy seems closer even without physical communication. The cards don't ask us to force those experiences into certainty, they simply invite us to notice them. Looking across these four cards together, it feels like perception itself has changed. The image this person once carried of you has slowly given way to something much more genuine. They aren't seeing the version created by assumptions anymore, they're beginning to see the person who has been there from the very beginning. And somehow, that quiet realization seems to be opening a door they never truly believed existed until recently. It feels like something inside this person has become impossible to silence. The energy has shifted away from hesitation and toward quiet determination. As the chariot comes into view, I don't immediately see someone rushing toward an outcome. I see someone who has spent enough time standing at a crossroads that they finally understand remaining still is a decision in itself. There is a different kind of confidence surrounding them now. Not loud confidence, not the kind that needs everyone else's approval. It feels much more personal than that. Almost like they've reached a place where they're asking themselves one simple question: if I keep living for everyone else's expectations, will I ever truly know what my own heart wanted? That question seems to linger. The energy suggests they may have realized how often they allowed outside voices to shape their choices. Family expectations, friends' opinions, the fear of disappointing people. the pressure to appear logical even when their emotions were quietly leading them somewhere completely different. Aquarius. It feels like those influences haven't disappeared overnight. They may still exist. Those conversations may still happen. Those opinions may still be shared. The difference is that this person no longer seems willing to hand over the steering wheel of their life every time someone else disagrees with their feelings. Yeah, that feels significant. Because choosing your own path doesn't always begin with a dramatic announcement. Sometimes it begins with a quiet decision that nobody else even knows you've made. As I continue looking at the cards, the Emperor steps forward with an energy that feels remarkably grounded. This person doesn't seem interested in making emotional promises they can't keep. Instead, it feels like they're asking themselves whether their actions can finally begin matching what they've been carrying inside for so long. I can't help but notice a growing sense of responsibility. Not responsibility toward pleasing everyone, responsibility toward living. There may have been a period where they kept waiting for the perfect timing, the perfect circumstances, or the perfect amount of certainty before making a move. But life rarely presents perfect conditions. It seems like they're beginning to understand that waiting forever may simply become another form of hiding. I also feel this person has been learning something important about boundaries. It's interesting because boundaries aren't only about saying no. Sometimes they're about saying yes to the life you actually want. There could be people around them who don't completely understand these changes. Some may question why they're behaving differently. Others may wonder why they no longer seek constant approval or reassurance. The energy suggests this person is becoming more comfortable allowing those questions to exist without feeling obligated to explain every choice they make. That feels like growth. Not because they're becoming distant, but because they're becoming more centered. Aquarius, I almost get the feeling that your own example has quietly influenced this process. You may never have realized how closely they observed the way you protected your peace, stayed true to your values, or chose authenticity over popularity. Those qualities may have seemed ordinary to you, but they appear to have left a lasting impression on someone who was still trying to discover their own direction. Ace of Wands enters the reading with a completely fresh atmosphere. Oh my God. This card feels alive. Not chaotic, not impulsive, just inspired. It feels like the first deep breath after carrying emotional weight for far too long. The energy suggests this person isn't simply thinking about change anymore. They're becoming curious about what happens if they actually act on it. There may be small decisions happening behind the scenes that no one else notices yet. A conversation they've decided to have, a habit they've decided to leave behind, a boundary they've quietly chosen to establish. Or perhaps they've stopped asking themselves whether they deserve happiness and have started wondering what happiness might actually look like if they allowed themselves to pursue it. Those are very different questions. Sometimes transformation begins long before anyone else can see the evidence. I also sense that fear hasn't completely disappeared. That wouldn't feel realistic. Fear may still whisper from time to time. Old doubts may occasionally return. But they don't seem to carry the same authority they once did. Instead of controlling every decision, those fears now feel more like background noise, while something much stronger continues pulling this person forward. Finally, Eight of Wands arrives, and the pace of the reading naturally becomes lighter. It feels like movement, not forced movement, not rushed movement, simply the feeling that energy, which has remained stuck for a long time, is beginning to flow again. I can't help but notice how communication seems to surround this card. Not only conversations with other people, but honest conversations with themselves. Sometimes the hardest words we'll ever speak are the ones we finally admit in private. Those quiet moments often become the beginning of every meaningful change that follows. Aquarius, it seems this person may be discovering that courage doesn't always appear all at once. Sometimes courage grows through a series of very small choices that eventually become impossible to ignore. Choosing honesty over avoidance, choosing vulnerability over emotional distance, choosing sincerity over appearances. Those choices rarely attract attention in the beginning, yet over time, they quietly reshape an entire life. Looking across these four cards together, I keep feeling that this isn't someone trying to become a different person. It feels much more like someone slowly returning to the version of themselves they may have lost somewhere beneath expectations, fear, and uncertainty. The path ahead may still hold unknowns, but there is a growing sense that every step they take is becoming more intentional, more authentic, and perhaps a little closer to the connection their heart has been trying to protect all along. There is a softness surrounding these final cards that feels very different from where this reading began. The energy no longer carries the weight of unanswered questions quite as strongly. Instead, it feels like two paths that have been unfolding separately may finally be turning toward the same horizon. As Two of Cups settles onto the table, I can't help but notice how much of this connection seems rooted in mutual recognition rather than perfect timing. It feels like both hearts have been learning different lessons through different experiences, yet somehow those lessons seem to point toward the same place. That doesn't necessarily mean every obstacle has already disappeared. It doesn't mean every conversation will happen exactly as imagined. But the energy suggests something meaningful has changed beneath the surface. This person no longer seems focused on protecting themselves from vulnerability quite the way they once were. Instead, there appears to be a quiet desire to share what has remained hidden for far too long. I keep sensing someone replaying possible conversations in their mind, thinking about what they would say, wondering whether certain words are enough, questioning whether honesty can still find its way through the distance that time may have created. There is something incredibly human about that. Sometimes people don't struggle because they lack feelings. Sometimes they struggle because they care so deeply that finding the right words feels almost impossible. Aquarius, it seems this person may have reached a place where silence no longer feels like protection. It feels more like unfinished business. And unfinished stories have a remarkable way of asking for one more chance to be written. As the world appears, the atmosphere becomes lighter. Oh my God, this feels like someone finally recognizing how much they've grown without even realizing it. Not only this person, you as well. I can't help but notice that your own energy seems much steadier now than it may have been before. The version of Aquarius standing here doesn't feel like someone waiting for life to begin. It feels like someone who has continued building a meaningful life regardless of uncertainty. You've continued learning, healing, growing, discovering new strengths you may not have known existed. The energy suggests you've become far more aware of your own value. Not because someone else finally recognized it, because you've gradually learned to recognize it yourself. That changes everything. When self-worth grows from within, relationships begin to feel different. Decisions feel different. Even the way you respond to uncertainty becomes different. You're no longer searching for someone to complete your story. It feels more like you're inviting people to walk beside you while you continue writing it. That's a beautiful place to stand. The Empress carries an energy that feels wonderfully abundant, not only in love, in life itself. There seems to be a gentle reminder here that growth often appears quietly before it becomes visible. A seed doesn't become a garden overnight, yet every day something unseen is taking place beneath the surface. It feels like that's true for you as well. The energy suggests your confidence may continue unfolding naturally, your creativity, your peace, even your relationships with yourself and the people around you seem ready to deepen. I also feel this person notices that change. They may see a version of Aquarius who appears calmer, more grounded, more comfortable within your own identity. Ironically, it may be that very sense of peace that inspires them to continue becoming the person they hope to be. Not through comparison, through inspiration. There is an important difference between those two things. Okay. The final card resting here is 10 of Pentacles, and I find myself smiling because this doesn't only speak about material stability, it feels like emotional stability, a sense of belonging, the quiet comfort that comes from building something lasting instead of constantly wondering when it might disappear. The energy suggests this person may be thinking much further ahead than they once allowed themselves to. Instead of asking whether this connection can survive today, they may be wondering what life could look like if both of you continued growing with honesty and mutual respect. Those thoughts feel very different from fear. They feel rooted in possibility. Aquarius, I also want to gently remind you that tarot often reflects energy rather than certainty. Every person carries free will. Every journey unfolds in its own unique timing. Because of that, these cards aren't asking you to wait. They're not asking you to stop living your life while hoping someone else reaches a particular destination. Quite the opposite. They seem to encourage you to continue honoring your own path with the same authenticity that has carried you this far. If this connection continues unfolding, let it unfold naturally. If conversations arrive, allow them to reveal themselves one step at a time. If unexpected opportunities appear, meet them with the wisdom you've gained rather than the fears you've already outgrown. Looking across this entire reading, I can't help but feel that every card has quietly been telling the same story in different ways. A story about honesty replacing avoidance. A story about growth replacing fear. A story about people discovering themselves before they truly recognize each other. Where that story ultimately leads will always belong to the choices each heart makes along the way, but it certainly feels like a new chapter has begun turning its first pages. Thank you so much for spending this time with me, Aquarius. If this reading resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories always bring so much warmth to this community. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to join me for future readings. Take good care of yourself. You are deeply appreciated, and I'll see you again in the next reading. Bye for now.